Bless the Lord, O my soul, blessed art thou, Lord. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name.
Hello, my dear ones. I'm sitting in the Narthex of our monastery's temple. The Narthex is the traditional place for those who have become catechumens to stand during the Divine Liturgy. After they have been baptized, they move from the Narthex into the nave. This is the pattern that we can read about in the Old Testament temple in Jerusalem. One of the beautiful things about Orthodoxy, once we have embraced the faith, is we are filled with a desire for our friends and relatives to become Orthodox and experience what we are experiencing. How are we going to go about that? How do we draw people into the faith? I really believe, as I experienced with my own parents, that loving them into the faith is the best way to do it. This means letting them see the transformational nature of Orthodoxy and how it's changed us. It's opened up our hearts to others. I live on an island that is probably 90% filled with people who do not go to church at all, who do have no faith. Or if they do have a faith, it's something akin to paganism or some false teachings of a non-Christian faith. But this has not stopped me and my monks from witnessing for Orthodoxy as we go out into the community, either to the post office or the grocery store, or just in the town itself. We make it a policy, whenever we leave the monastery, to know that we must engage our neighbors and our fellow islanders with love and openness of heart. I have many friends who are not Orthodox. I have friends who have become Orthodox. We even have a couple who live in the village below the monastery who are now actively Orthodox. And in fact, Edward is now a reader in the church. The way we ultimately drew them in was by the playing of our bells. Ed and Matrona told me once that they asked one of their neighbors if they thought it would be okay for them to attend a service at the monastery because they felt a tug in their hearts by the hearing of our bells. And they came and they were hooked. And we loved them. We have a lot of people on the island who have converted to Orthodoxy. Surprisingly enough, but it's been a joyful experience for me personally to see these people and their eyes opened to the true faith. One of the things that we can do to let people know the truth of Orthodoxy is by living it with our love. If you are invited to dinner at the home of some people who are not churchgoers, rather than just dive into your food, make the sign of the cross and then bless yourself. You don't have to say anything. It can all be said internally and in silence. But I can guarantee that if you do that, it's going to impress them and it's going to move their heart. I remember one couple that I was having dinner with, that they had invited me to their home for dinner. And I could see that immediately they weren't asking me to bless the food, they just started in. And I blessed the food, my plate, and I made the sign of the cross. And this woman said, "Oh, Father, would you do the blessing?" And so I blessed all of our food. And then she ended it with the words, "Om." And I said, I should probably do it again, because you just sort of, you kind of destroyed the blessing by saying Om. And she laughed. And then I did. I blessed the food a second time. And she has not said Om ever again in my presence. But I said it with a cheerful tone, not a judgmental tone, but a cheerful tone. One of the things that has happened over the years, not only to me, but to many of my priest friends and certainly to the other monastics here, is the number of individuals who have come up to us and thanked us for dressing like we do. I remember one time I was in the Pike Street Market in Seattle, and that happened. It's happened all kinds of places. People coming up and saying, "I really appreciate the way you dress, because we live in such a secularized city and there are no images of Christianity anywhere to be seen. Roman Catholic nuns no longer wear the habit. In this area, you don't see Catholic priests with clerical collars very often. But when we see monks and Orthodox priests, we wear our cassocks. And we have beards, and if we're traditionally minded, we have uncut hair and uncut beards. And people see that, and it really moves them." I remember one time I was walking in the Pike Place Market, and there was three people coming along, and they had a whole long line of little children who were all holding on to a long rope. And one of these teachers came up to me ahead of this long train of children and said, "Excuse me, but the children all think you're Gandalf." And then as they got closer, I looked down to the children and I said, "Hello, children. My name is Professor Dumbledore." That was actually what they said. They thought it was Dumbledore. And I said that not because I'm a follower of Harry Potter, but because Harry Potter is a positive image in our culture. The Professor Dumbledore is a positive image. Gandalf, even more so, because Gandalf is a character who represents Christ. And the series of books that involve Gandalf were written by a very serious Roman Catholic who wanted to share Christianity with people through this fiction that he wrote. So I remember one time I was getting off of a ferry and a little girl came up to me and she said, "Excuse me, but are you Dumbledore?" And I said yes, and the little girl and her friends kind of giggled with joy. As I was walking off the ferry onto the dock, an older girl came up and she said, "Are you Gandalf?" And I kid you not, just as she asked the question, my phone rang. And on my phone, I have the theme to the movies that depict Gandalf. And The Lord of the Rings. And when she heard that, it was like a confirmation that indeed I was Gandalf. What that does is it's not like I want them to really believe I'm Gandalf, because I really don't think that that's who they thought I was. But then they're going to be curious, just what is he? And then they find that I am an Orthodox monk. Well, what is Orthodoxy? Well, it's certainly a faith that has joy in it, because otherwise I wouldn't be saying things like that. I wouldn't be responding in that kind of way. You know, I can remember one time I was with a clergyman of one of the denominations, and he happened to be wearing a clerical collar. He wasn't Roman Catholic. I think he was Anglican, if I remember right. But someone came up and made a comment to us about our attire. And my friend responded in a very sort of remote, serious way. Like he thought that in order to give honor to his profession, he had to be professional. But as an Orthodox priest monk, I really believe that what I want to impart to others is not a professionalism, but joy. Because I do live a life of joy. I live a life in Christ. And I am grateful to God that I have been drawn by the Holy Spirit into the Holy Apostolic and Catholic Church as it was in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries, virtually unchanged. I've said this before and I'll say it again. If one of the apostles walked into a megachurch or one of the denominational churches, he probably wouldn't know where he was. But if he walked into an Orthodox church during the Divine Liturgy, he would know where he was. After Chernobyl happened, there were a group of people in the Puget Sound area that brought a lot of the children, young people, from Chernobyl to have a time to regroup and to heal after the tragedy of having to move out of their city and flee the radioactive fallout. And so the Presbyterian Church on Vashon Island hosted them. And I didn't hear about it until toward the end of their stay. And when I did hear about it, I went to the minister there and I said, most of these children and young people are probably Orthodox, but they've never been brought to our monastery. So he said, oh, good point. So they brought them over to the monastery. And I was the cook at the time, and I made fish and boiled potatoes and things that I knew the children were used to having back in their own country. And they were all so delighted, and they said, oh, most of the food we've had have been hamburgers from a place called McDonald's, as though to make these people, these young children, happy, they needed to see how we Americans eat. And they were disappointed. But most of all, they were disappointed in the services that they had to attend because they were being hosted by these people. And one of them said this, and I will never forget it. He said, it's sort of like, what is this? It's sort of like walking into a lecture hall in a college or university, where the minister is standing in the pulpit in the center, and he's giving this long lecture, and then it's spattered around with hymns that they're singing. But he said, it doesn't seem like worship to us. It doesn't seem like it's genuinely church, and it isn't, and it wasn't. But this is an experience that we want all of our friends and relatives and neighbors and co-workers to know about. But how are they going to know about it if we're not willing to share it? Most of us, unless you're a priest or a monk and dress like we do, most people are not going to know anything about your faith unless you witness to the faith by making the sign of the cross before you eat your food, by having icons in your home so that when people walk into your home or your office, they see at least one icon. And if it's your home, an icon corner with a lampada burning. That's when people are going to start asking questions about, gee, what's this about? And this is what we can do to witness to orthodoxy. We can have an icon on the dashboard of our car so that when we're driving a friend around and they look at that and they say, well, what's that about? When I was a young Lutheran, I remember with admiration seeing Catholic You always knew when it was a Catholic driving a car because they always had a little plastic statue of Jesus or the Holy Virgin on their dashboard. You don't see that anymore. It's sort of like they've become embarrassed by giving witness to their faith. But we Orthodox cannot do that. At the very least, we should have an Orthodox cross hanging from the rear view window or mirror in our car, so that when people get in or when people see us parking, they look and they see an Orthodox cross. And they know we're people of faith. So let's all make a concerted effort to witness to the faith. I remember once we had a young boy here at the monastery who would come with his mother and his sister to the liturgy. And one day he didn't want to come to church, and so I went to visit them, and I said, "What's going on with you?" And he says, "Oh, well, I don't have any friends here." And I said, "It's not my fault. Have you invited any of your school chums to come to church here?" Well, no. And I said, "Why don't you? Why don't you invite them?" And the next Sunday, both he and his sister brought friends from their school to witness Orthodox liturgy for the first time. We adults oftentimes, as committed as we may be to the Orthodox faith, don't think about inviting relatives and friends to come to the Divine Liturgy on Sunday with us. We don't think about it. Now, it's certainly a good thing that parishes oftentimes have festivals, a Greek festival or a Russian festival or simply an Orthodox festival. That's wonderful. It's a wonderful way to bring the community in. One of the largest such festivals is at St. Demetrius Greek Orthodox Church in Seattle, who's pastored by my dear friend, Father Photios. It's a huge event. And they not only serve wonderful, fabulous Greek food, but they give tours of their church, and they have a bookstore set up so that people can actually buy icons and books about Orthodoxy. Any parish can do this. But more importantly, I think, is what we do as individuals and how we mirror Orthodoxy to our friends. And let them know that this is a faith that brings us great joy and meaning to our lives. So, go forth, dear ones, with the gospel and with the truth of Orthodoxy, and share it from your heart. God bless you.
Both now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Only begotten Son and immortal Word,